So William Edwards here with the business, and another big day for those Eurozone leaders converging on Brussels for another summit. But at the heart of it all, European Central Bank.
That's right, we've been hearing about the big picture, but before we get to that summit this evening, we're going to be hearing from the European Central Bank. They're expected to be cutting interest rates today. Of course, they started hiking up interest rates a few months ago at the first signs of inflation, which is their remit. Their remit is to keep inflation in line, but it quickly became clear that growth was much more important. Growth in the Eurozone, of course, has stagnated. Upping interest rates is, well, not expected to help that very much. So they're back on the way down now. But perhaps more interesting is the ECB's role in potentially saving the euro. Today we're expected to hear that they are extending credit lines to the banks, and they could even have a broader role in buying up government debt of troubled Eurozone nations like Spain and Italy. Let's take a look at the details.
The European Central Bank is under pressure to help stop the Eurozone from unravelling. Some see Mario Draghi, the new ECB boss, as the man to fix the mess. But he and the bank have limited powers. The ECB's main task is maintaining price stability. It sets interest rates accordingly. A cut now is on the cards. Draghi is also expected now to introduce what are being called unconventional measures to keep the Eurozone's banks flush with cash for longer. At the heart of debate about the ECB's role are two competing visions. France wants more intervention.
I am convinced in the face of the risk of deflation across Europe, the ECB will act and will decide when and with what means. That's its responsibility.
Berlin, meanwhile, spells out that it will not give the ECB carte blanche.
It is, of course, important to point out that the European Central Bank's job is different to that of the Federal Reserve in the United States and the Bank of England.
Draghi has repeatedly stressed that there's only so much he can do. It's up for Eurozone countries, he says, to get their finances in order, adding that if governments show they're credible, he in turn will step up bond purchases.
And meanwhile, in another sign of continuing Eurozone worries, France has received a downgrade.
Well, we don't want to cause a bank run or anything, Stuart, so I must specify that it's not quite as bad as it sounds. Although there have been, of course, huge worries about France's AAA credit rating, whether that will be downgraded, causing problems for the whole Eurozone. France has received a downgrade from the Dagong rating agency, a Chinese ratings agency, down from A+ to AA-. Perhaps reassuring, I suppose, that France is now in line with the US, which continues to receive very low interest rates on its borrowing, so perhaps not quite such bad news. But it is part of a bigger picture. Of course, there are these worries about the Eurozone, and S&P yesterday announced that they are keeping an eye on the EU as a whole, and indeed European banks. If there are any further problems with the euro, they could be downgraded.
And you've got some rumours for us as well. Rumours that the Eurozone nations are making contingency plans for the end of the euro.
That's right. Interesting report here from the Wall Street Journal. Like you say, reports rather than firm facts here. But it is reported in this article that the contingency plans being made by these central banks, particularly Ireland, for example, is allegedly considering its needs when it comes to printing presses. Of course, if countries were to drop out of the euro, they would need another currency, and very practical level, printing presses need to be considered. Meanwhile, Switzerland is apparently weighing up an alternative to the euro as a currency peg. But I suppose one bit of slightly good news out of all this, the silver lining, is that Greece, the central bank there, has its own printing presses. So if they need to print currency in a hurry, they'll be all right.
That'll give them some employment at least, especially to unstuff the mattresses. That solves the problem. What about the markets then? How are they looking?
Pretty optimistic actually so far. Let's take a look at the European markets, how they're opening up, and it's ahead of this key summit. Things are all in the green on the major European markets there, so some optimistic sentiment. Not quite the same story as in Asia, where it was the opposite way around, really. On close, you see that the figures were all in the red there, so perhaps a bit of bounce back on the European markets this morning, but it's early days yet.
OK, we're going to move over to North America now, where there's tension over a proposed oil pipeline project. The Keystone XL pipeline could send oil from Canada's tar sands all the way to Texas, but construction has been put on hold by President Obama, who says a review is needed due to environmental concerns.
Canada has hundreds of billions of barrels of oil in the form of tar sands. A proposed pipeline called Keystone XL will take extracted oil to the Gulf of Mexico. Opponents say the project threatens ecologically fragile areas. Supporters say it means jobs. The US President, meeting Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, says he won't be rushed into a decision.
This is a big project with big consequences. It is my job as President of the United States to make sure that a process is followed that examines all the options, looks at all the consequences before a decision is made.
Republicans say Obama is delaying Keystone XL to avoid a confrontation with environmentalists. House Speaker John Boehner wants a ruling now and proposes tying it into legislation for a middle-class tax cut Obama dearly wants. A showdown on the oil pipeline project is in the offing.
Any effort to try to tie Keystone to the payroll tax cut, I will reject.
The tussle on the Hill follows a move by the White House last month to delay a ruling on Keystone XL until 2013. That is after next November's election. The pipeline and the politics overshadowed key Canada-US talks, which saw significant agreement on border security and trade.
And next, a bit of a surprising meeting that took place in London between the local Occupy movement and some of the top regulators in UK finance.
Yes, this was the chief executive of the Financial Services Authority, and one of, like you say, the key regulators in the UK. Hector Sanz, he went down to meet 9 representatives from the Occupy London movement. Of course, that is in the shadow of St Paul's Cathedral, and it was part of an initiative by the Church of England. In fact, this meeting took place. They had an hour-long discussion, Hector Sanz and the protesters, and apparently it was quite fruitful. According to the protesters, the head of the FSA said there would be changes to the organisation's previous light touch approach to regulation, but needless to say, the organisation, the FSA, won't go as far as the protesters perhaps would like.
And finally, we're having a look at this year's survey and what the most expensive cities are for expats. I'm sure everybody out there is going, it's the one I live in, but what's the answer?
If you live in Tokyo, then you're absolutely right.
Okay.
So Tokyo is on top again, actually. It regularly does make that post. It has been battling with Swiss cities. In the top 10, there are 4 from Japan, 4 from Switzerland, and you see 2 from Norway as well, including Oslo in at number 2 there. But this is according to ECA International. You can see Paris there at number 20. Cities like London and New York didn't actually make it into the top 20, which might be as a surprise if you've ever lived in London in particular, speaking from personal experience. But cities including Sydney and Moscow did beat out Paris further up the rankings there.
When they did that survey, they obviously did not come to Paris and buy themselves a cup of coffee, because that would have shot Paris right up. All right, well, thank you very much. William Evans here with the Business Today here on France 24, and Claire's got the latest news summary for you really shortly. Stay with us.